And so our koans, our traditional koans, have come from over, 1,000, 1,500 years of compiling stories of students and teachers, interacting and talking, having awakening experiences, or asking questions, and the teacher is trying to help the student awaken. And so we get to learn from their experience. It gives us a chance to see the teachings and practice them in a live way. So we try to reenact that in a sense. We try to work that awakening or understanding. And I'll get to that more in a bit. To introduce the talk today, I'm going to try not to go over too long, like 30 minutes. I'm going to try to keep it to, but I don't know. I'll try to time myself. Yesterday we met in our community, in our Sangha, to talk about a grant, right? Churches and, nonprofits often, right, or apply for grants to get money to do good things. And we had applied and gotten a grant from an organization called the Lens Foundation. And it's kind of a popular source of grants for, at least in our Buddhist larger community, right, like nationally or internationally. A lot of Buddhist Sanghas have gotten grants to do work. And it's kind of a funny situation and setup. Lens was a guy who was like a self-proclaimed Buddhist master, which in itself doesn't really make sense. It doesn't work that way for Zen. Normally you have to study with a teacher for many years, probably an average of 15 to 20 years. And then you get trained over a long period of time. The teacher is supposed to basically be able to see that you're manifesting Zen, like Zen awakening, thoroughly, with clarity, without stuck places, so we all have stuck places. We all try to make progress with them. And that's part of the process, right, of training, as we go through our stuck places and we learn how to work through them and find the emptiness and the oneness and the freedom within our stuck places, but then also making progress with our stuck places. And so this guy was like, hey, I'm a Zen master and I got my transmission in my last life. And it was a funny story. But he started to get people to take him seriously enough to come to his things and do workshops and sort of offer, special practices that aren't traditional Zen. And he got a lot of money. He got a ton of money. And he basically has his story now is it's considered a tragedy in a sense that people in the Sangha were abused. There was manipulation. There was kind of a cult mentality, that kind of abuse, abusing sexuality, and ultimately he committed suicide. And I'm not an expert on his story. I don't know a lot about it, so I'm not really talking as an expert about him. But just on the surface, so you have a sense of context. We met yesterday, right? Because one of our Sangha members brought up, well, is that money like dirty money? Like, did the money come from people who suffered and lost things in order for him to accumulate the money. And what does that mean for us? Like, let's go deeper. Let's look deeper into where this comes from and assess the integrity of the money and taking the money and how we feel about it. And so it was a very profound, powerful discussion for us as a community to talk about it. And we haven't really come to a decision. This was just yesterday. There's not like a decision whether we're going to take the money or not, but it's a question that's up in the air now. And so that's part of what I wanted to talk about today, to play on that a bit. And the question is, how can we discern true teachings and true wisdom? You know, if we're looking for a teacher or a sangha, how do we know? How do we know the difference? Because there's been Zen sanghas who are traditional Zen sanghas who have also suffered because of the abuse of a teacher. There have been abusive teachers in our lineage who are not supposed to be teaching now, right? They lost their respect and their position, and it's like out there now that they're not supported by the larger teacher associations. And so there's warnings out there, like on the internet. If you look them up, you know, you'll see that they fall from grace. And so we're not immune to that kind of suffering and ego and selfishness and greed. You know, all of these things are still here. We don't overcome these things through becoming a teacher. And so that brings me to the next kind of point that I wanted to reinforce, which is progress and perfection. I've worked most of the 12-step programs that there are because I have addictive personality. And so I can relate to these stories, right? I've fallen from grace in my own ways in different times throughout my life due to addiction and selfishness. And I don't think you can find those stories on the internet. But I invite you to try. It's not like they're hidden. It's not like I haven't, you know, abused anybody in particular. I've been an asshole. But so anyway, my fall from grace is maybe relatively minor compared to some of these that we're talking about. But I'm just relating with empathy that I can see both sides of this. I know how easy it is. I know how powerful addiction is, and I know how vulnerable we can all be at different times. And how difficult it is to come back from that, and how much it takes to keep making the progress. So progress and perfection is really, so the 12 steps, if you've been, anyone in the 12 steps has probably heard, we strive for progress, not perfection, right? So if you go to 12 steps, you know, it's usually from a place of suffering. And we learn that we're not trying to be perfect, right? No one's going to work the steps perfectly. Nobody's going to do everything they're asked to do perfectly. So we go for progress. We accept our progress. It's like, well, I'm not perfect, but I'm making progress. And that's kind of the key. And if you're not making progress, then you're stagnant and you're stuck in some ways, probably. And so we go for progress. We're trying to make spiritual progress here. However, what's different in Zen is that we also recognize that it's perfect as it is. So it's progress and perfection. So, right, of course, I have issues and I need to, you know, make progress in lots of ways. And I'm perfect just as I am, right? Just right here now, just the way I am is perfect, always. And that's the foundation of Buddhist awakening, and is realizing that everything is perfect as it is, right here and now, always. Yeah, so yeah, the talk yesterday got me thinking about, okay, so lens, right? We can point the finger at this guy who's a self-proclaimed master, and we can see that he did things wrong or poorly and caused suffering. How can we learn from this, right? How can I, so right, if I see what's wrong with him, if I'm not also looking at if I'm repeating that in some way, if I'm enabling the same kind of suffering, then it's not much good to point the finger, right? I need to be able to reflect back on myself and see if I'm enabling that. And so I did that, right? I looked at our koan book to see what we're enabling. Of course, we're enabling something, right? It's just inherent, I think, in everything, in every teaching. There's some blind spot. There's something that's overlooked. There's something that's not being called out or recognized, because part of it's culture and some of it's ignorance and some of it's willful ignorance. And for us, so this koan book, this is a koan book of about 50 koans, stories of ancient being 1,000 years old, masters and students. And before I go into this, what I want to really encourage is that this is what I want for you all. I want you all to be able to do what I'm doing here. And of course you can, but I'm saying it overtly, right? I want you to find what's wrong with Zen. I want you all so it's part of making this practice your own. Make Zen your own Zen, which means awakening to the blind spots that other people may not see. What is being left out and excluded or ignored. And then bring it up, right? Share it so that we can all look at it, just like we did yesterday. It strengthens our community and our spiritual progress when we can do this. Right? So how do we discern true teachings? Well, that's a good start, right? If you can find teachers and sanghas that are going to invite you to find what's wrong with them and call it out, to talk about it openly, that's a good sign. That's a green flag. On the other hand, if you find teachers that aren't talking about their shit and aren't inviting people to call it out, that's a red flag. So in this, so we're in an amazing place in history right now where it's very progressive. We're basically in a progressive modern time where equality, equity, freedom, and supporting the vulnerable are all values for at least half of the people. Half of our culture is striving towards this kind of progressive value of helping the vulnerable, being inclusive, as inclusive as possible. And so so looking for how women are treated in this book is where I started. I was like, well, how are we seeing women through our koans? And again, it comes from 1,000 years, 1,500 years ago. And so this is pre-progressive times. But ultimately, progressiveness is like a core value. And so Zen really does embrace that. Zen is a progressive religion or spiritual path. In my mind, right? This is my opinion and my belief. And so, right, there's not a whole lot of bad things in this, right? It's a lot of good things. It tends to be progressive. But what I did see is that women, so the koans between the masters and the students are generally men. Like 99% is men talking to men. And so women are mentioned in this book 3 times. There's 3 koans out of 50 where women are mentioned, but they're mentioned, but and not necessarily in the best light. They're not being, you're not being denigrated necessarily, but it's like, it's kind of a side eye, you might say. And so anyway, I'm just gonna, like, again, I'm gonna try to keep it, I have 7 minutes. I'm gonna try to keep it short. This is like a college course or something I'm trying to squeeze in here. But basically, there's one koan about a woman. There's an old woman who's giving monks a hard time. It says, Joshu sees through the old woman. So it's an older woman, and she's like, monks are walking by, and she's like kind of nagging them. And they're like, they get all huffy and upset, and they go tell the teacher. They go, this old woman is bothering us. Can you go like see what's going on with her? And then the teacher goes and talks to her, and she's basically just totally cool. Like she's like a wise old woman who's just like giving monks a hard time for like, why are you going off to meditate over there when your life is here now? So that's one instance of women being here. And this is pre-trans acceptance. So, right, I'm not trying, I don't, like, that's a blind spot, right? There is trans people forever, right? And they're not being necessarily talked about here, although Avalokiteshvara is considered a trans Buddha, a saint, Buddhist saint. But I am just talking about women in this traditional sense. The second is Seijo's soul is separated. And it's the koan about a woman who says her soul is separated. And she's living one life, but she wants to live a different life. And it separates. She separates. And then at the end of the koan, she comes back together. So she's not the teacher in the story, but she's like the subject of the teaching. And it's an example based in. So anyway, this kind of separation is something I take very seriously. Having a soul separated usually comes out of tremendous suffering, which I think is minimized here, right? There's not a lot of talk about people who suffer a lot and what happens because of that, and how do they recover from that. And it's a lovely koan, right? It's written with compassion. But again, this is the second example of a woman being talked about in the book. And the third is a woman comes out of samadhi. And Choa talked about this a couple of weeks ago. 2 Buddhas are basically arguing about who can bring a woman out of samadhi. Like if samadhi is like a deep state of meditation, right? It's being very deep in presence. And and I was like, why would anyone want to bring her out of samadhi? First of all, right? And then why would anybody be arguing? It's like some kind of an alpha argument, like, well, why could he do it, but I couldn't? And it's like, well, why bring her out of samadhi in the first place? Why bother her at all? And so there's some, I think, I don't know if it's misogynist, but there's some selfishness there. It's like egocentric, male-centered worldview there. Right, so these aren't blatantly talking negatively about women, but it's not including them as equals throughout the whole story of all the koans. You know, so there's real blind spots here, right? but there's good news, right? If this was all I had, I'd be like, yeah, right? You may want to find a Sangha that has more support for women and trans people. But it's not. It's not the end of the story. The good news is that we have another book of koans that was written by a lot of teachers, but it was created at the Zen Center of LA, or came out of the Zen Center of LA. I don't even know. I'm not even going to say it because I'm not an expert in where it came from, but it's from our lineage. It's from our Sangha, our extended Sangha, that they created a book of householder koans. And they really did a powerful job of getting new stories from people like in the last decade. This is people who are alive, like people that we know, who contributed this, and it's their stories of being a parent, being at work, being a caretaker, being a child, being women. I don't know how many I haven't looked for trans stories in there. That would take another level of diving into it, right, to really to go into it. This is a brief overview I'm giving you all. But it does a much better job of really telling the stories. The koans aren't about, these are very esoteric. this is men talking to men 1,000 years ago, writing poetry and talking in almost metaphor. It's almost all metaphorical language. It's not easy to access. The Householder koan book, which came out maybe 10 years ago or so, really does try to get into that. It's trying to tell the stories from the women's point of view, the vulnerable point of view, dealing with life issues that none of these guys dealt with, right? Driving the kids to school, helping them with homework, having a baby, dealing with sick parents, being a caretaker. And so, yeah, I commend our lineage for really helping to make that progress, right? This is perfect as it is, but we've made a lot of progress towards being more perfect for our time and place now in history. I was going to show you a clip of the video from Rama, the teacher from the Linz Foundation that I was talking about. I'm not going to, right? It would be, right? And I don't want to bag on him, right? I don't want to make him into a bad guy or someone who's not to take seriously, because I take it seriously. And he's just one example of so many that has led people astray with, he's a great talker, he's charismatic, he says all the right things, he's making promises. You will be happier, you will be more successful. And and that's how he talks about meditation. He says, meditation will make you happier. In fact, I'm more successful because of my meditation, and I accomplished this because of it, and I'm happy. I'm the happiest person I know because of meditation. If you hear somebody saying that in a song, if you're looking for a Sangha or a teacher, and somebody's talking like that, that's a red flag. Zazen, meditation, I think in general makes us less happy, because we have to go through the shit before we can come out on the other side and make that progress. The progress comes through suffering on some level. The suffering is looking at myself directly and experiencing who I am and what I am without all the distractions. So meditation gives us a chance to sit with this energy, right? Just from an energy perspective. I have bundled energy that's tight and stuck from all the years of emotional, pushing emotions down, traumatic experiences, feeling anxiety and stress, and not really having a great outlet for that. It accumulates in our energy, and it's like we start to manifest, whether it's emotional or mental or physical, right? These variety of things that come up when we keep stuffing things down and we don't really have a real healthy release. And so, as I was sharing with someone a little earlier, it took me about 5 years of meditation and doing a lot of meditation, like an average of 30 hours a week for 5 years to kind of hit my pool of anger, right? Of course, like I've had anger issues like in different ways throughout my life. It's my frustration is really kind of mostly what I struggle with. It's like I'm frustrated and it's an angry energy. So it took me about 5 years of settling my energy to be able to really tap into that reservoir under the surface. And then I sat with that, like anger, just sitting with anger, like feeling, oh, so angry without the story, right? That's part of the process is we learn to get in touch with the emotions and the feelings without the story. So I'm not angry about this anymore. I'm not angry about that anymore. I'm just feeling the anger directly. And I sat with that for 5 more years, right? Another 5 years of sitting with this, just being it, letting my energy relax until I can just be it, right? Being one with anger. And then it starts to release, right? That's part of what the meditation does offer, is that it's a release of energy once the energy is settled. Am I happier? In some ways, I think more it's really a sense of contentment and acceptance. I'm a little more content with my life and my issues. I'm a little more accepting of, well, yeah, I do have issues, and if I screw up, I'm going to make amends, and I'm going to try to make progress with it. And I wish I could be happier, right? I admire people who are naturally happy. I'm naturally frustrated with bouts of happiness shining through. But this acceptance, right, is the perfection. I strive to be more one with everything, right? I strive to have empathy for all things. That's my progress. And then when I'm settled, or just, occasionally I slip into perfection. And I realize, oh, my life is perfect as it is, just like this. And that's the absolute perspective, right? It's the perspective without any story around it, right? We look at what's happening in the world or what's happening inside or with myself. It's only good or bad relative to the story I'm telling about it. If I drop the story, it's like, no, there's disease, there's death, there's pain, there's love, there's joy, just as it is, right? That's natural. Part of the universal flow is that these things will happen. Is it good or bad? Is it imperfect? Well, if it's imperfect, it's because of the story I'm telling about it. And then we do address things that are imperfect. We make progress. We try to make progress. So the practice is to be able to make progress with the things we are unhappy with, and then recognize the perfection that's there if we drop the story at the same time.